The Edmonton Oilers made it to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup final last season, largely on the back of the team's star players Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. What if I told you the team's most important player is Mattias Ekholm on today's edition of Locked On Oilers?
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers. I'm your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone that's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So today's show, we are going to walk through why Mattias Ekholm is so important to the Oilers, both in terms of their night-to-night outcomes and then the big picture, why they're so essential to the team, why Mattias Ekholm is so essential to the team's overall success. We're going to start just the straightforward facts, the context, the workload, quality of competition. We'll move along. We'll hit on the underlying metrics, the big differences in Ekholm's underlying numbers this year versus last year, and we'll tie a bow on it, talking about his health, some of his recent form, especially since the start of the calendar year of 2025. So at the outset, it's important to address the very obvious. Mattias Ekholm is one of the Oilers' best players, most talented, most gifted, and his skill set is unique. His skill set on this team in particular is particularly useful because the Oilers don't have a ton of it. When we address the mindset and the idea of the defense-first defenseman in the modern NHL, a lot of people go to one of a few people. They go to Jacob Slavin of the Carolina Hurricanes. They go to Gustav Forsling of the Florida Panthers. Those would be the two most prescient. Some would bring up Mackenzie Weegar of the Calgary Flames. I, for one, have long maintained Mattias Ekholm is right up there. When he's at his best, he is one of the best defensemen in the world at actively preventing the other team from going from defense to offense. And it's tricky to evaluate and explain the impact of defensive defensemen, especially for guys who don't throw a ton of hits, who don't block a ton of shots, because those are the most visible and obvious ways you can impact defense when you're noticeable. But as I've long maintained and consistently point out, just because you're noticeable does not mean you're good. There are plenty of players in the NHL who throw their bodies around, who skate out there like chickens with their heads cut off, full speed, trying to hit anything that moves. The problem with those types of players, and why it's becoming a less present skill set in the contemporary NHL, those guys don't have the puck a whole lot. The chicken with their head cut off forechecker, or the big lumbering defenseman who blocks a ton of shots, uses his long reach, those are slowly but surely being phased out. And someone like Ekholm, who is a strong but not elite skater, who has great positional instincts, has a really active stick, especially in transition, and then, to boot, has pretty good puck skills for somebody who profiles as a defense-first defenseman. Now, when I was younger, NHL media people used to refer to any defenseman who didn't record points as a defensive defenseman. I think about watching guys like Dan Girardi and Mark Stahl and Dennis Seidenberg and Johnny Boychuk. And there's a laundry list of guys who were not the most gifted with the puck on their stick and would put up 10 to 20 points, but they would block a lot of shots. They would kill penalties. They had that resilience and that tenacity that made them the belle of the ball in the eyes of evaluators, both in terms of people on teams in positions to make decisions, as well as the casual public and as well as the media. And now I think we've reached a point, especially with the emergence of the Quinn Hughes, Cale Makar, Adam Fox, Miro Heiskanen, Evan Bouchard, as we've unlocked that tier of player that maybe 5 or 10 years ago wouldn't have gotten as much of an opportunity, as we've unlocked that, we have, even in the terms of the defense first defenseman, we have unlocked a different archetype. There are still Logan Stanleys out there. There are still Carson Soucy's and Tyler Myers, 6'4", 6'5", 6'6", even as much as 6'7". They have long reaches. They clog shooting lanes. They're not the most mobile. If you put them in conflict where you make them make a decision between playing the puck or playing the pass, they're going to struggle with that at times because they're not going to be able to keep up with the pace of the game, and their decision-making is directly influenced by their ability to keep up with the pace of the game. But what I like the most about Ekholm's game and why I think he's so crucial and why I think he's arguably the Oilers' most important player is he's their one defenseman that actively prevents the other team from creating offense. And Darnell Nurse is having a perfectly fine season. I would say I am actively impressed with the season Darnell Nurse is putting together right now in light of how his playoffs went last year and in light of how his season started this year. I would say I've been very impressed with Jake Wallman so far. His defensive numbers since coming over from San Jose have been very, very welcomed and needed. But it's Ekholm who, when he's healthy, and it is absolutely essential that Mattias Ekholm is healthy if the Oilers are going to do what they need to do this year, if they're going to go on a deep, meaningful playoff run. And he has, especially in transition, a unique means of being in the right place at the right time. And that's a combination of positioning and good, sound fundamentals of being where you need to be. But he also has the physical gifts. He can skate well and he can handle the puck well in a way that most guys who profile in his department, the defense first defenseman, they don't have that. And we'll wrap on this note, but in today's league, in any sport, the most obvious and straightforward way to getting yourself paid is counting stats. If you're a wide receiver in football and you put up 1,200 yards receiving on 80 catches and a couple tutties, you're going to get paid like Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. If you're in the NHL and you facilitate a point per game pace as a defenseman like a Quinn Hughes and Adam Fox, a Cale Makar, you are going to get paid. Being a defense first defenseman is a rough path. You are never going to have the earnings potential or the earnings capacity of your offensively inclined contemporaries because goals are what get you paid. There's the speech in Moneyball towards the beginning of the movie where Jonah Hill is telling Brad Pitt, teams shouldn't be buying They shouldn't be buying players. They should be trying to buy wins. How do you buy wins? You buy runs. In hockey, you got to buy goals. If you want to beat the other team, you need to have paths to victory predicated on scoring as many goals as possible. And some teams know that's going to be a little bit too difficult for them, so they opt for a more conservative approach. They opt for more of a low event game, and hopefully their star players are good enough that they can swing the game on those handful of plays that are going to determine the outcome. Very similar to the conversation we had about the game on Sunday night against the Rangers on yesterday's episode, where very low event game, both teams less than 30 shots on goal, not a ton of quality offense, but the Oilers star players made enough plays when the game was in the balance to swing the game in their direction. We are going to take our first break of today's show. When we come back, we're going to dive into Mattias Ekholm's underlying numbers, why I think a lot of the struggle in his numbers this season are the results of just bad luck, and a whole lot more on this edition of Locked On Oilers. So be sure to stick around, where we've got your team covered every day. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, and design, and a whole lot more. Experts are ready to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. If you need help with a marketing campaign, Upwork can connect you with a freelance expert who has a proven track record of incredible results. Posting a job is free and simple, and within a day, multiple qualified candidates to choose from. Instead of hiring full-time, Upwork helps find affordable, top-tier freelancers to scale your business efficiently. Visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's UPWORK.com. Upwork.com. Connect with top talent and grow your business today. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. There is nothing like getting to a game or a concert live. The energy of the crowd, the loud sounds, or if you're one of those, a hot dog or a pretzel, or maybe even a celebrity sighting courtside. If you want to catch a game in person, Game Time makes getting tickets easier than ever. Game Time's new feature, Game Time Picks, filters out the fluff and shows you only the best deals on great seats. So you don't have to waste time scrolling through thousands of listings. I checked the Game Time app, and that's how me and my friends are going to go to Devil's Flames on Thursday night. We picked up the super deal, which gave us the best bang for our buck, and most importantly, has the seat view, where you can see the view from your seat before you buy, no surprise fees, and a lowest price guarantee, meaning you can book with confidence. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Tuesday Mattias Ekholm edition of Locked On Oilers as we're walking through why the Swedish defenseman is so essential to the Oilers' results going forward. And Ekholm is not somebody the Oilers are going to be able to bank on long term. There's a very real chance that Ekholm as a professional has already peaked. For lack of a better word, once you hit that age 32, 33 benchmark, anything beyond that, if you're still getting positive value, you are making out like a bandit as a team. And I think a lot of people lose sight of the fact of how hard it is to maintain a Stanley Cup contender, because not only do you need to account for raises for younger players, and the Oilers are an old team, they don't have a lot of young guys they really need to worry about locking up for the future, but typically speaking, that's the first impediment to maintaining a contender long term, that you typically are going to graduate a couple guys from RFA contracts to closer to UFA contracts or outright UFA contracts, and those guys are going to go get paid. And the conundrum you have, if you are a Stanley Cup contender for an extended period of time, is what do you prioritize in those negotiations? Do you want continuity, or do you know by looking at the situation, this probably isn't going to go well for us if we do this? You think about how Tampa Bay unwound their position after going to 2 straight Cup finals, losing Barclay Goodrow, losing Blake Coleman, Andre Palat, Alex Killorn, trading away Ryan McDonough, trading away Mikhail Sergachev, and maintaining a competitive team is a real challenge. And sometimes you're going to have to cut bait on good players like they did with Ryan McDonough, who is having a great season back in Tampa Bay this year. But for the Oilers, and looking at this group, you really are locked in on not a whole lot. You've got term on Draisaitl, you've got term on Nuge, term on Zach Hyman, term on Darnell Nurse. Beyond that, you have one more year of Connor McDavid at this price. Next summer, we're 3 months away, 4 months away from, hopefully 5 months away from, if you're really trying to believe in this. If you're 4 months away from Connor McDavid being able to enter contract extension negotiations, it's imperative you get that sorted out right away. And from there, then we can start to understand what the next phase of the Oilers is going to look like. And in my estimation, one of the reasons the Oilers, especially last year, were able to graduate from regular season darlings into a bona fide Stanley Cup contender was the emergence of Evan Bouchard alongside Mattias Ekholm. So I'm going to read you these stats for those two guys together in the playoffs last year. In 407 minutes, they had 57% of the scoring chances, 60% of the shots on goal, 64% of the goals, 61% of the expected goals, 62% of the high danger chances on 10.7 shooting percentage and a 918 save percentage. In the Mattias Ekholm, Evan Bouchard minutes, the Oilers outscored their opposition 22-10. That 65% goal share is next level dominance. And the real key, and why I wanted to highlight that number in particular, in the non-Ekholm Bouchard minutes in last year's playoffs, the Oilers were outscored 22-35. You think about what the defense looked like in the playoffs last year. You talk about Nurse, Kulak, Philip Broberg drew in at a point, Cody Ceci no longer on the team, Vincent Desharnais no longer on the team, and you're dealing with Nurse managing a pretty serious injury. You are dealing with Philip Broberg's learning curves, even though Broberg, I think, was largely fine in the playoffs last year. But to get to that next level, it is outright essential that you have not just a good, you have an actively dominant first pair that properly supplements your team's offense. And Ekholm and Bouchard played a ton of minutes with McDavid and Hyman in the playoffs last year. And that synergy, that trio together, controlling the flow of the game, is an integral part of the Oilers' recipe for success. So much of the Oilers' struggles over the last month or so is the simple fact Ekholm has not been himself, and then that trickle-down effect has hampered the team's 5-on-5 production. They have struggled to score consistently. They have given up rush opportunities. They've been scored on a lot. And some of that, of course, is at the fault of Stuart Skinner and Calvin Pickard, who aren't exactly putting up an all-time great goaltending season. But all of these factors are interconnected. It is essential that for Connor McDavid and Zach Hyman to be successful, that Ekholm and Bouchard, or maybe something different, and we'll talk about that more in the next segment. Maybe when Ekholm comes back, you see him playing with Darnell Nurse, or maybe you see Jake Wallman with Evan Bouchard, or maybe you see something entirely different. And the Oilers have 14-ish regular season games remaining, and one of the decisions they need resolution on is who's going to play with who come playoff time. And I am inclined to believe that, especially with how that first month of the season went, where the Oilers' bottom two pairs were getting absolutely obliterated, and Chris Knobloch chose to stay the path and keep Ekholm and Bouchard together, in spite of me coming on Locked On Oilers once or twice a week and saying, I think you should play Bouchard with Darnell Nurse, and you should try and mitigate that risk and distribute that risk a little more evenly throughout your lineup and hope that Bouchard can carry him along. And those results turned the corner eventually, end of November. They beat the Rangers back in November, and ironically kind of sent the Rangers on a tailspin, and they themselves went on one of the best stretches of any team this entire season, 700-some points percentage, elite power play, elite penalty kill, passable goaltending, and they hit a wall about the Four Nations break. Since coming back from that, they've really had a hard time scoring with any real consistency. They definitely need their goaltending to kick it into gear. But I don't think it's a coincidence that Ekholm struggles this year have largely mirrored the Oilers' struggles at large. And I think fundamentally, for the Oilers to reach their ceiling, Ekholm, who again, he's probably the team's fourth or fifth best player when he's healthy, he might be the single most important piece to this team because his skill set is so unique. And frankly, it's not something the Oilers have. Like, Nurse is having a fine season. Darnell Nurse is not a shutdown defensive defenseman in the same vein of Ekholm. And it's imperative that Ekholm gets right if the Oilers are going to make this happen for themselves. We are going to take one more break on today's show. When we come back, we'll tie a bow on this. We'll talk a little more about Ekholm's metrics. We'll talk a little bit about what the ideal role for him is, a whole lot more. So be sure to stick around to this edition of Locked On Oilers.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers. And the thing I love about Mattias Ekholm, and again, there's a direct correlation here to adding Ekholm to this team and the last 2 seasons. He's been on the team for 3 seasons now. You know, they got him in season 2 years ago. He was on the team for 20 some odd games last season, and then the first 60 some odd games of this year. He's missed 7 games possible this year out of a total of 67. And we know he got sick during the Four Nations face-off with that flu that was going around and really knocking guys out. On all 4 teams had guys miss games because of the flu that was going around. Then you have whatever lingering miles have accumulated on the odometer. Ekholm is not a young man anymore. I imagine, and I've made this comparison before, you know when you have a phone that's older and the maximum battery capacity starts to get stunted, it doesn't go all the way back up to 100 anymore. It stops at 90, 85. I've had a phone where the maximum internal charge was like 75 because it was so old and so worn down. That's the way recovery works once you start getting older, and it's why if you want to maintain elite physical conditioning into your late 30s and your 40s, you need to be militant about your body management. You need to be like LeBron. You need to be like Tom Brady, because that recovery curve starts to become steeper and steeper, and it becomes more and more challenging to get back closer to that 100%. And you think about the accumulation of the last 2.5 years, the playoff runs, going all the way till the end of June. Then you think about, all right, you get July, you got August, you get a week in September, and that's all you get as far as R&R and recovery. And it is absolutely essential that Mattias Ekholm needs to be healthy. And like I said before, the tell is the split in minutes and the results in their minutes of Ekholm and Bouchard together in the playoffs last year versus any other permutation of defenders, because that aggressive of a split where we're talking a plus 12 and then you're talking about like a negative 13 in the inverse, that is an aggressively large split. And some of that you could tie to the overall issues the Oilers did have at various points in the playoffs. When you think about their struggles in the Vancouver series and in the Cup final itself against Florida, it was the prolonged sustained shifts in their own zone that spent a lot of time wearing down the defense, and Bouchard being the only defender who was really comfortable at breaking out and going from defense to offense quickly. And the role Ekholm has in that, and I think you can draw a line from the perception about Bouchard's struggles this year. He's been a little more volatile, a little more prone to the big mistake, to Ekholm's struggles himself. And I do want to hit these stats while I have them up in front of me. So since January 1st through yesterday, in Mattias Ekholm's minutes, 58% of the scoring chances, which is very much in line with his season-long results, 58% of the shots for, 11 to 19 goals for versus goals against, 37% goal share. That is well below what you would expect for a defender with these metrics, because you go to the next round, 58% of the expected goals, 54% of the high danger chances. And then this is where I think it comes down to luck. 4.64 on ice shooting percentage. So when you add up all of the shots on goal while Ekholm is on the ice for him and all his line mates, comes out to 4%. League average is about 8% at 5-on-5. So you would expect those numbers to help buoy a little bit closer to an even goal split. And then to go a level deeper, 8.889 save percentage at 5-on-5. So you add those two together and you, let's say, stabilize them where they would be league average, where 8% shooting and then 900 save. If you were to get those numbers with the underlying metrics in terms of scoring chances, shots on goal, high danger chances, then I think you get a lot more accurate account of Ekholm's play. And some of this really might just be that last year was the peak. That last year was the best that team had and the best it could get out of these various players. And they are simply regressing to closer what they are. And accounting for regression, whether it be positive or negative, I think that's something we lose sight of. We just assume that if a player plays at a really high level, they're going to be able to maintain that. And it's not that Ekholm has been bad this year. It's that last year he and Bouchard were elite. There was a strong argument that was the best defensive pair in the entire NHL last year. Was some of that because they got to play so many minutes with Connor McDavid? Of course. But you did have to go out there and you did have to execute. And when you can get that aggressively favorable of a shot share, of a goal share, of a high danger chance, of an expected goal share, and you add that up into a long-term recurring statistical profile, you get a pretty apt descriptor of what that player is. And I don't think Ekholm, I don't think almost anyone on the Oilers this year that has had a regression from last year. I think you're having the fact that everyone is having it happen simultaneously gives me a little bit of hope that this is a team-wide kind of funk, something's a little different stylistically, and not that every single one of these guys hit an age-related regression wall all at the same time. I think the former is significantly more likely than the latter, just based on probability. I don't think you have entire teams regress simultaneously without something environmentally being different, the team generating some fewer chances, fewer quality chances. The composition of the team's a little bit different. They have less foot speed. They're a little bit less smooth in transition. You typically create better chances when you live in transition because you're able to put defenders and goalies in conflict. But all of that's to say, the Oilers need Mattias Ekholm healthy, and they need him to be at his absolute best if this team is going to make something fun happen come April, May, and God willing, June, because he is their best defensive defenseman. And without that, this group is going to end up in a lot more volatile and offense-first games. But that will do it for today's show. I want to thank everyone who made Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. For your second listen, go check out Locked On NHL, covering all of the biggest stories from across the league with the local expertise from Locked On. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.